Welcome to Talking with Tatchell. The far-right British National Party is bidding for respectability. At the upcoming 3rd of May elections for Scotland, Wales and local authorities in England, it's fielding a record 800 candidates. It's hoping or expecting to double its local councillors in England. There's a real possibility that it will have this breakthrough. Now, of course, today the BNP has discarded its bovver image, exchanging the skinhead look for slick city suits. But what really has changed? Has the BNP done a transformation or just a slick PR image to fool people into voting what is still essentially a nasty, nasty party? With me to discuss the issue is Matthew Collins, a former member of the British National Party turned anti-fascist, who works for the anti-fascist organisation Searchlight as director of its Operation Wedge. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, Peter.
I'd like to first ask you, I mean, as someone who has been on the inside of the BNP, do you think they've changed? Is this just a PR makeover, or is really this party just, you know, the same old neo-Nazi group that it always was?
It's a very good PR makeover. I think it has changed because it's had to seek respectability. I think the conditions in which it operates have changed for its benefit. But I think the reality of it is that even though, you know, they are wearing slick suits, it's still the same old skinheads. But it's because, you know, it now is a different party to the one that I knew, but it's the same people, and it says different things to the things that they used to say, but they still feel the same. And it's a very good PR makeover. I mean, it's the third best makeover in the history of British politics. The first was the Labour Party, you know the Blair thing, you know, the change from old Labour to new Labour, and then we've got a Conservative Party leader, Cameron, who's racing from the bottom up to get as far into the centre as he can, and then you've got the BNP, who sort of are running from the extreme right straight into the middle and trying to pick up everything they can in between. And rather like Blair and rather like Cameron, they will say anything to anyone. And at the moment, of course, you know, we were talking about it before, it's all sound bites. So it is a different political party in the way it operates, in the way it functions, in the way that people view it, and also in the way that it views itself. And of course, the issue is, from the way that we attack it, or the way that we come at it, is that it's all about what's in the core and what's in the centre. So the answer is, just to confuse you, is yes and no.
Okay. Well, what is in the core? What is in the centre? What are the essential values?
The essential values of the BNP is racism. And 10 years ago, you could say to the BNP, you're Nazis, you're racists, you're fascists. And they would go, well, you know, they would really struggle with it. But they've learned something now, which of course is you know, the most simple thing is to just deny it. It's been on their website recently. You can, you know, is when you're called a Nazi or a racist or a fascist, just deny it. But the core is still that racism, and the core is still this. You know, they talk about now we don't want to repatriate, which is a long word for like deport people who aren't white anymore. But what they actually are now is a party that believes we can create an apartheid system. So we can avoid pictures of black and Asian people being put onto the back of buses and sent off, you know, to visit their auntie or go east, or, you know, just be put on boats. But they will create a system which is like the apartheid system, which is they just make life so unbearable for people living here who don't conform to the idea that Englishness or Britishness means that you have to be exclusively white. Well, they create an apartheid system where they withdraw the very fabrics of like a modern, multicultural, multiracial society, and that's the way they do it. They realise now you don't have to be as aggressively vicious as they used to be if you've learnt to just deny the past of your party, if you learn to deny the things you believe. For instance, you are a racist party. They say, well, yes, we believe that our race belongs here. They use the word now indigenous, which is something for years and years. You know, we talk about the indigenous Africans who were suffering under apartheid. The BNP have learnt this language that they talk about the indigenous British who are suffering under multiracialism, multiculturalism. So they've sort of got all that. It's a change of language. And also the most important thing is this ability to just deny things. And so the argument is now, for us, like, anti-fascists, because that's what we are, is to actually explain what is in this new language, the same way that people explain the language of New Labour, I suppose. And it's, the language has changed, the clothing has changed, but the reality remains the same. They are a party that will separate people in this country based on their race, based on their colour, based on their beliefs, their sexuality, their abilities or their disabilities. They will do that. And of course, the other problem that we face is then that when all this information that we have and these things that we have to tell people is, first of all, getting the electorate to listen, because the electorate don't feel they're being spoken to. People think we have a deaf electorate. We don't. We have a dumb political system that doesn't talk. And I think John Cruddas says it the best. Our political parties who have governed and run this country and have set the agendas have now become virtual political parties. The most active political party in this country is the BNP. Tonight they will be knocking on doors somewhere and doing what they do best, which is the big lie. No matter what the BNP say about anything, or they can talk about cleaning up parks, they can talk about sport, they can talk about education, health, it all comes down to racism. And tonight, somewhere in this country, someone would have read something in a newspaper, and particular newspapers, well, you can stab at it if you want. And the BNP will be on the door with a very simple answer. And it comes back to, of course, we have virtual political parties, but only one that's prepared to knock on a door, because the level of political debate is so shallow at the moment, that you can knock on a door tonight, Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Jones will answer that door, and you will tell her something she wants to hear, because she isn't getting another political message. Or
you mean the BNP's telling?
Oh yeah, we call it the big lie. We've had Africans for Essex in Barking and Dagenham, where the BNP claimed that black people were being paid £50,000 to move there. It was a lie. They acknowledged it was a lie, but no one challenged it, and no one was realistic, and no one was pragmatic in talking about the changing shifts across London and the UK, how things change. They don't always get picked up by the census, and things change. And these virtual political parties, the one that we sort of put our faith in, themselves haven't caught up with these changes.
So you're saying that the BNP is much more a grassroots party, and it's veigled itself into local communities.
I'd say,
and it's building like community links, whereas so many of the big parties have atrophied.
Yeah, that's a very long word. I don't know what it means, but using the grass analogy, they're like a bloody mole. They've just tunnelled up.
Yeah.
You ever get a mole in your garden? You can run around hitting it with a shovel as much as you want, but they tunnel up from underneath, and probably it's a vacuum. Probably they are filling a vacuum, but they're not actually filling it with anything
they're
good.
Exploiting it.
They're exploiting it. And so the arguments that they use, they're not using arguments, again, talking about that agenda or the lack of faith that people have in what we see to be real politicians, is that the BNP will knock on your door tonight, and if you're white and you're working class, they will prey on your fears. They don't offer you solutions to your fears. There's a very good example in London's Evening Standard about the BNP out canvassing, knocking on people's doors. They can see exactly who the person is who answers the door, and Mrs. Smith, did you get your widescreen digital colour television today? No, I didn't. Did you know all those asylum seekers, when they arrive, get digital colour televisions? No, I didn't know that. It's a lie, but it works. And it's almost as if, the question I sometimes ask, and we discuss it at work, and we don't often have fisticuffs at work, but it's an interesting discussion. Who is actually setting the agenda in terms of the politics that we monitor and the politics we're involved in? Are the BNP setting the agenda, or has the agenda been set and ignored by these virtual political parties? They're not a smart party, Peter, as well. I want to make that perfectly clear, because they have new words, like I said earlier, but they have the same agenda. They just realise now that they haven't got to argue as hard, or they think they haven't got to argue as hard.
They must be quite smart to get where they are. I mean, sadly, they've got these extra councillors they never had years ago, And they look like they're going to get more on May the 3rd.
We come back again to that, the whole idea about the vacuum. Let me just...
Do you want to perhaps tell us about the Hope Not Hate tour?
Oh, yes.
Which Searchlight's been involved in.
Searchlight and the Daily Mirror. You can actually, I think it's still on our website, which is hopenothate.org.uk. Spent 2 weeks in a big old red bus. Now, I know you're in the Green Party. It wasn't the most environmentally friendly of buses. I think it did like 7 miles to a gallon. But travelled the country, and the idea was to sort of defeat these arguments. We spoke about being pragmatic. First of all, is we acknowledge that there's a lot of work to be done in this country over some of the issues which the BNP may profit. But however...
You want to explain what those issues are?
Well, the issues are, I think, integration has become an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think radicalisation of both... We talk a lot about radicalisation of Muslim youth, but also radicalisation of white working class youth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Abel Hanser and Nick Griffin, you can have them like glove puppets, but at the end of the day, they shake hands very well. Deprivation.
Crime, immigration.
Yeah, crime,
bad housing.
immigration, bad housing, lack of council housing, affordable housing, the breakdown in communities across the country. You know, people used to go to a mill or go to a pit or go to a factory. That was black, white and Asian people, particularly up in places like Burnley and that, in the fabrics. You know, so those sense, you know, the sense of community has changed. You know, and change is a very difficult thing to encompass or encourage or explain to people. But what that bus did was we went to, you know, we didn't go to Asian neighbourhoods, we didn't go to black neighbourhoods, we didn't go to all white neighbourhoods, we went to all of them and drove the bloody bus right through them, and everywhere we stopped we made an example of there are issues here, but also look at the great and the good. And this was the whole thing, I think, about empowering those people who actually have acknowledged difficulties and actually want to make the change. And we drove this bloody red bus at, well, I don't know, 37 miles an hour. So if there was a traffic jam, if you was on a traffic jam in England or Scotland or Wales within the last month, it was probably due to a big red bus with Daily Mirror on the side. And we went to these communities and we highlighted where people are doing the work that people don't think is being done. We went to places where they've taken kids off the street, put them in a football team, take them to college, and now these kids will be qualified coaches, you know, qualified Football Association coaches. We went to boxing clubs where you leave all your prejudices outside the door, black, white or Asian, and you go in and, you know, you beat the hell out of each other for however long they do it. We went to cricket projects, which was based upon the fact that you talked about people from the Indian subcontinent, like people whose history or roots are in Pakistan or India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. These people are cricket mad. So we've been to projects which has said, well, let's get these kids into the local cricket club. And, you know, so when people talk about integration, oh, they don't integrate, we went there and said, actually, the work that you think's not been done is being done. Stop whinging about it. And we highlighted everywhere we went, you know, the people who are making the difference. And it's the only way you can do it. And of course, we chucked in a few celebrities.
Like?
Oh, the Sugar Babes.
Mm-hmm.
Or as John Cruddas was absolutely certain, the Sugar Girls or the Spice Babes. I've got all your albums. Billy Bragg, he turns up with a guitar and he'll play a song, and but he actually fights a good fight on this issue, particularly about the Englishness thing, defining it. Soap opera people, I don't watch soap operas, but some of them were very popular. Footballers, journalists, you know, basically all the people that your grandmother, your grandson, your uncle, your aunt, your sister would like to meet, and they all turned up and endorsed the campaign. Even the guy that used to be on Brookside. Apparently he's in Coronation Street now.
Even the guy on Brookside?
Yeah, Sinbad. I don't know what he does now in Coronation Street, but yeah, he was on it. So it was good, and it was terrific. And then.
But do you think it actually changed hearts and minds? Did it actually undercut?
No.
Did it undercut the values or the fears that the BNP preys on? Well,
there's two sorts of buses. There's the Hope Not Hate bus that we did,
mm-hmm.
which talks about hope, not hate. And then you've got the BNP battle bus, which turns up at night, putting leaflets, vilifying your neighbours through people's doors, with suited men who look like bloody gangsters. They used to look like skinheads, they look like bloody gangsters, putting leaflets through your door. And then there's our bus, chugging along, saying, this is about you. It was never about us. It was about us taking a message. It was about us getting some you know, celebrities to help. But it was us talking about your community, empowering communities. So at the end of the day, what it highlighted, like I said earlier, the great and the good in the community, and it had a positive spin on it. But of course, the idea was, as well, you know, the trade unions were so behind it, was that once that bus trundled off very slowly into the sunset, that we invigorate those people on the ground. There's no point stopping off with, you know, some woman from Coronation Street saying, we hate the BNP and these are good things. The idea is when the bus leaves, the work continues. And that work does continue because we highlighted things that were going on in communities that people didn't know about.
Mm. So really, a lot of what you were doing was, you know, exemplifying things that communities were doing to bring people together, to show that people could work together, can live together, that we can work together as a society of many different races, faiths, sexualities, or whatever.
Yeah, and like I said about being pragmatic was that knowing that there are issues surrounding that this stuff doesn't get done, or a certain group doesn't do this or won't do that. So the idea was, actually, this isn't true. Because talk about agendas in this country, and particular, you know, newspapers, is they never highlight these things because it's not news. When is the last time you opened up your newspaper, or like the Daily Mail or Daily Express, and it said, God, this was a bloody good day to be in this country? And this is the whole thing about the BNP literature as well. Wherever they travel, they're vilifying people. And they're not just vilifying the people they really hate, the Asians, the blacks, the gays, all this. They vilify white people. And I talk, you know, we talk about a lot about, or I talk a lot about that because of my past, a lot about the way that, how they isolate people. And, you know, so their tour is about isolation. It's about enforcing these bloody big walls that exist in communities. And ours was about knocking down walls and saying, let's build a different community. And one of the things that I really should make clear is the BNP, you know, they're a racist party, they vilify people, they encourage you to hate your neighbour because of whatever makes them different to you. But also, one of the things, if you read their literature and their website, it ain't good news. They're, you know, and they don't talk this country up like they love it. And everything they say about Englishness or identity or culture or community is actually alien to what England actually really and realistically is. They call themselves patriots. And one of the things is they actually isolate these white people they claim to speak for. And we can go into people that they've isolated. We've had their councillor, you know, their former council candidates who have taken to stockpiling weapons in the north of England because, you know, they're being so vilified by what they've been told by the BNP. And you can go and talk about David Copeland, the London bomber, who attacked black people, Asian people and gay people because he wanted to kill them, because he'd had his mind filled with this whole vilification that you cannot fit him. Now, you know, that is an isolation. And I go back to saying Griffin and, you know, Abel Hansa. There is no difference between the people who bombed London on the 7th of July, 2 years ago, who killed people, and David Copeland, because they were people who had fallen under a hate preacher. And the difficulty we have now is, of course, one hate preacher could have, you know, up to 100 and something councillors. But the other thing is as well, we must remind people, you know, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of councillors in this country. And all of them...
So what you're saying is we should be mindful of the threat
very, very mindful.
Posed by the BNP,
but let's not
not exaggerate it.
Yeah, let's not forget, you know, let's not forget that there's more of us than there are of them.
I mean, can I just bring you back to the whole thing about the upcoming elections?
Sure.
My perception is that the BNP thrives on apathy, that a low turnout increases their chances of getting their candidates elected. So one of the really important things that people can do to fight the BNP is to use their vote. Go out and vote on the 3rd of May, because the higher the turnout, the less chance that the BNP gets elected.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you want to be really technical about it, I don't suppose we'll go into it now, but if you really, really hate the BNP and you vote Tory, then you might have to vote Labour or Lib Dem. If you really, 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 you know, in order
to stop them.
In order to
tactical
stop them.
Voting.
Yeah, tactical voting, which is interesting. Actually, you know, I don't know when the last time I heard tactical voting. That was 1987 or something. But yeah, don't just, you know. And the other thing is as well, because I come from like a Labour movement perspective, is the other thing is that, you know, in terms of Tony Blair, you know, he's going soon, you know, and the Labour Party's been around a lot longer than him and will be around a lot longer than him, and we need people to sort of keep the faith. But also the other political parties. We need people in the Liberal Democrats and the Tories and the Green Party and any other party that is standing who has a progressive message to acknowledge that we don't need people, you know, we don't need a party driving itself into, you know, the political debate, who will then, given the opportunity, deny all political debate to other people. So come out and vote.
You're saying that the BNP, you're saying if the BNP got power, they would start closing down the levers of democracy.
Of course they would. Always be very.
But you're saying more subtly than the past. It wouldn't be the sledgehammer. It'd be more like gradually, slowly.
I don't know. One of the things we must highlight is, and you can look on our website, hopenothate.org.uk or stopthebnp.com, is how bloody awful BNP councillors have been. But let's
poor attendance records.
Poor attendance, don't even turn up. My favourite ever quote was, the only time this guy in the council chamber ever asked a question was to ask what abstain meant. The other one was the guy who quit Barking and Dagenham Council because he said, I'm far too thick for this. Didn't stop him taking, you know, the reasonable sums of money that councillors can get paid. Given the opportunity, if we're lethargic about it, or people are tempted just, you know, to stick two fingers up and vote a BNP person in, given the opportunity, they will be, you know, they'll be removing that fist from the velvet glove. Don't worry about that, because it's still, you know, they always, I say, always be wary about a party that continually shouts about freedom of speech and democracy, freedom of speech and democracy. And people often say, why don't you get the BNP on here to debate about these things? The simple answer is, you don't afford freedom of speech and democracy to people that would use those avenues to deny it to other people. And I have seen the shadow budget that a group of BNP councillors put in one council, and it is apartheid. It is apartheid.
Explain.
Now, well, basically, they would withdraw from...
Which council are we talking about?
I can't really say it because they don't know we've seen it.
Yeah.
But it is a council in this country where the BNP may well do very well. And what they have done is they have just divided up the city, and in the part of the city where they are strong, will get all the funding. In the other part of the city, which is mainly Labour, has a strong ethnic community, a good ethnic community as well, would be denied all kinds of things, grants, these kind of things, would be denied access to community centres, would stop getting the little things that help people integrate and work together, social cohesion programmes, mother and child groups, toddlers groups, pensioner groups, would lose their funding in that part of the city, not in the other part of the city. Now that is a plan they got for everything. So whether they're saying we're going to send people back or not, doesn't matter. They would create an environment where you just wouldn't want to live here.
So the groups they target, in particular, you know, black and Asian people, Muslims, Jews, gays and lesbians, you know.
Oh, well, yeah.
Times slowly would get harder and harsher and more difficult.
And let's address that issue as well, because we sometimes come across these very decent, genuine people who have been in the BNP for a year, and they're sucked into this whole... But the BNP are defending my idea of Englishness and Britishness. Again, this whole vilification, you've lost something. And they always say, but we have a spokesman from the Sikh community who wants to vote for the BNP, and we have 2 Jewish councillors. Well, let's get it right, how that happens as well. The guy who supports the BNP, this is a Sikh person, only supports the BNP because this week they're on about Muslims, and he hates Muslims. Mine enemies, enemies, my friend. The 2 Jewish councillors have both gone on record to saying they've joined the BNP because the BNP hates Muslims. Now, I'll take you back to the time when I was in the BNP. The first book the BNP gave me was an explanation of how Anne Frank's diary was a hoax, how the Holocaust was a hoax, how Jews run the world, how Jews poison the water supply. And all they've done now is, because the agenda has changed, and times have changed, they've taken off, you know, the skinhead boots and braces and put suits on. They have replaced Jews in their hatred with Muslims. And before that, it was West Indians when they first came to the country. Before that, it was Ugandan Asians. And still they maintain the same hatreds. A snide remark about gay people. The printed belief that the BNP is anti-abortion. It does not believe in genetically modifying anything unless, of course, you can identify the gay gene in the unborn child. That is the BNP. Now, you try telling BNP members that, they're stunned, they're horrified. And we go back to then why we make this big effort to remind people.
So much of their extreme agenda is being hidden under this new makeover.
I believe the real BNP agenda comes after the meeting when the ordinary members of the public have been dazzled by the nice words, and then the people who are there running this machinery sit together and talk about how they hate Jews, blacks, gays, and what they're going to do to them. And
so in a sense, there's a party within the party. There is the BNP,
yes,
and there's an inner core which adheres to these far-right extremist views, which haven't changed.
And they're the ones that drive this internal agenda that the BNP have got. After the BNP failed in 2005, they got almost 1 million votes. They got 800,000 council votes, 200,000 in the European elections, the London elections. They said they'd been robbed. For a few hours on the BNP website, they spoke about, there was an article, and they said, if we can't win this way, we will become a revolutionary party. Now, that was gone in the morning, but that was there long enough for everyone, just to remind us exactly where the people who run this party, who started this party and formed this party came from. You know, these are the people who still believe that race is an issue. When to the most naked of eyes, the issue in this country is still poverty. These are
so you know, it seems to me that what they do is pander and exploit and exacerbate people's fears and anxieties.
Yeah, absolutely.
Use them, manipulate, and of course, some genuine people who aren't necessarily racist get hoodwinked, get drawn in, and think, hey, these people aren't Nazis.
Yeah, we've got to be very honest about that. You have to be very, very honest about that. But you know, it's the people that are driving this agenda. You know, and that's what you know. So not only we've got to remind the electorate, and also again be pragmatic and tell people that yes, there's work to be done, and we're big enough and we're strong enough to encourage it and be part of it. But we've also got to go to people who are sucked into the BNP and say, look, open your eyes. What is around you? So
what you're saying is, the bash them over the head isn't the tactic that works. You know, for a lot of people who've been seduced by the BNP, it's got to be about education and persuasion. It's got to be about exposing what the BNP is really about.
And it has to be as well on the issues where they're strong. We have to remind ourselves that historically, we come from a position in this country where everything came at a cost. You know, to fight for the National Health Service, to fight for votes. People who died in the First World War in this country couldn't even bloody vote. You know, it comes from that perspective. And so the issues in this country that are difficult, particularly crime and housing, you can say that's because of race and colour, like the BNP will. But the BNP will never talk to you about the poverty in it. And poverty actually in this country doesn't discriminate. If you're born somewhere with a postcode, poverty doesn't matter what colour you are. And that's the thing we'll take back to the electorate, hopefully on May the 3rd.
Okay, Matthew. That's a good point, I think, to finish on. We need to remember that poverty and deprivation, fears and anxieties in many communities are what the BNP exploits and preys on. So vote on May the 3rd. Make sure you stop the BNP. The higher the turnout, the less their chance of winning. I'll see you next week for Talking with Tatchell.